AI and Business Operations with Blake Caraway.
The AI DevOps podcast is a show for those shipping software using AI, .NET, Azure, and Devops. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods and sharing success stories. Sponsoring the podcast is ClearMeasure, a software architecture and engineering firm that implements AI to empower software teams to establish quality, achieve stability, and increase speed. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your team move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that AI, Azure, and the .NET ecosystem has to offer. My guest today on the show is Blake Caraway, and he is the general manager of Texas Multi-Chem Limited, which is a Texas Hill Country company where he spent over a decade transforming daily operations through technology. He has a degree in computer information systems from Southwest Texas State University, and he began his career as a programmer at Dell Computer Corporation and then moved into software architecture at Callaway Golf. He later joined Headspring Systems in Austin, which was later acquired by Accenture. He was a principal consultant there where he led agile software project. He shaped many client-facing architectures and helped grow the consulting practice. And then Blake brought that software experience back to his hometown of Kerrville, Texas, where he now leads Texas Multi-Chem, which is really a preeminent sports field contractor of Texas. If you're building a sports field, football field, soccer field, they probably did it. And he uses technology to improve internal operations, one business process at a time. So, Blake, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Thank you. Good. Doing very well. Glad to be here with you.
Awesome.
Good to speak to you.
Well, going back in time, just so the listeners kind of understand the level of expert that we're bringing here on the show. You moved into a specific business for the last 10 years, but you had a very successful, dedicated career, starting as a software engineer and moved up to software architect. But go way, way back. Do you remember what was it about computers and making computers do interesting things that kind of was interesting to you in the first place?
Yeah, I was in college. I started working in the, I didn't grow up, really a nerd at all. I was into sports. I went to college to play baseball, actually. And within a month, I learned I didn't love it as much as everyone else did there. So started working in the computer lab, kind of, saw it was a, pretty cool interest, and I knew that's where things were going, so, internet was being invented about then and in the 90s. And, so started developing an interest then, got into, my major, the CIS major, and really started ramping up towards, that was a Y2K hire. So, in 98, that's when, Dell was hiring hundreds a month, in their IT, department to battle the Y2K thing and to be ready for it. And so I was one of those hires. So started in there on the tandem team, actually, doing Y2K patches on mainframe COBOL code, and did that for a while, and then started branching out into other typical projects at that time, which was modernizing, trying to get off of Big Iron. That was a company, initiative for a long time. And probably, I'm sure some of it to this day still, there's probably a few pieces, I'm sure. It's been a while since I've checked in on that.
Yeah.
But so that was my interest. I just loved being able to, invent things and do very, very productive things to help, a business organization, run, faster, smarter, leaner. It felt like magic, whenever we can take a piece of software and analyze some data, modernize a process that was largely, maybe paper or, pieces of technology, but not really seamless or integrated very well.
Mm-hmm.
And, you felt like a wizard whenever you started, analyzing a problem and then stitching, a full end-to-end technology solution together and helping everyone just be, so much more productive, reduced error rates, just things like that, reduced toil, so that's what, was, really energizing, and that's what, drove my career. I was there 12 years in the industry, in the technology industry, before, moving on, working in various capacities, like you mentioned, and then, decided join the family business, which I worked at some, growing up. Decided it was a good time to jump out of technology and into the family business, and did a lot of the same things here. So, we're a company that's, now we have 4 offices. When I joined, we had 2. We opened up a third shortly after I joined up in 2010. So it's actually been 15, 16 years now that I've been back in Kerrville here in the family business. So it's hard I just was thinking about this the other day. I've been, in this family business professionally longer than I was in the 12-year technology industry.
Nice.
That's crazy. I
Yeah.
hadn't thought about that math in a while. So, still miss, working, with you guys, you and my peers, that I worked with for a long time. But yeah, I'm doing a lot of the same things here. So I brought, automation and integration and different pieces of technology to a company that we've been in business since 1940. Sorry, 1980.
Yeah,
it's 40 plus years now.
better.
So, we'd be setting some records. But that's, 1980, we've been in business a long time. And, so in 2010, we were doing a lot of things that, had been executing the same way for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And we were growing. And so we had 2 offices, and then we were starting to open a third. So, all those same policies of, the needing to, how do you communicate one office to another? It was a very paper-driven process, everything we did. And, so I just started taking, the pieces that, I always used to do, analyze a business process, identify, how can we make this better? How can I make it faster, easier? That kind of thing, and start really breaking down the data, the situation, so whether it's our, order management system, which we didn't really have. So I brought in a CRM, tool, web-based tool, and then one that I can customize, and boy, did I. It was great. And so I just able to customize a CRM to match the things that we already did, and, start taking one process at a time of moving orders around the company, and then helping our sales staff, how they submit orders, bringing them, a web-based tool to submit orders. Believe it or not, in 2010, whenever I joined, it was, all of our orders, most of our guys worked out of our sales guys worked out of this Kerrville office, but, the process was, carbon copy, orders, the blue, the white, and the yellow copy. And, and then we would, so that was all over the state. I'd have a sales guy, over, out of town. Sorry. We'd have sales guys out of town that needed to put in, submit their orders, and, so they would fax their paper copies to this office, and that's how they came here. But on their side, they had their, their carbon copies turned into work orders, all that good stuff. So I just started taking each one of those processes and doing what I had learned to do in the technology industry, and I started integrating things, bringing technology to places where there was a lot of human toil, literally, I just saw what we did. I didn't have anything new. I'm not saying, hey, here's something new we need to do. It's just, hey, all the stuff we were doing, let's do it better now that we have, a web-based tool and some other processes that we could use, to like, for instance, quit standing in front of a fax machine about 2 to 3 hours a day. That was, part of the process of communicating with customers, tell them we're going to come out and do some work on their ball fields. So I just took all that and started, picking one process off after another, bringing data to it. If you can put data to something, You can automate it and click it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a lot of really fun data analysis, the stuff I've been doing a while, and breaking down a process into its data components, and then what are the actions and the behaviors, what are the constraints, things to know, business rules, all that fun stuff. So I just brought all that to a company that had never had any of that, and so that's what I've been doing, and I'm still doing it to this day. We have 35 employees now. Business, we have offices here, El Campo, which is between Victoria and Houston,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Ennis, Corsicana area up towards Dallas, and then we have an office in Lubbock now. And people at all of them, we only have 2 out in West Texas, but we've had business there since the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been doing business everywhere. We're just putting offices and more people in the areas where we've been doing business, so we can obviously serve the customer better in a more productive way. So that's a lot of what I've been doing. Pretty much just being in this industry, I like to say we kind of see things in ones and zeros. We kind of look at stuff because we've had to do this for so long.
Mm-hmm.
Look at business processes, and then our charge is to improve it or eliminate it. Maybe if it's a manual process or something like that, automate it somehow. So I've just taken all those principles and the experience that I had, in the technology industry specifically, and just brought it to this, to the family business, and been doing that really ever since. I mean, there's probably, there's only a few days that may go by at a time, where I don't, implement or tweak, some of the, the software processes that,
Mm-hmm.
that I've brought, into the company. I'm either, even after all these years, I'm either, changing some screen in our CRM, adding a bit of data, adding a flag that means something, making something red in front of us so it's more obvious, for
Right.
our, our process somewhere. I mean, it's just it's the constant improvement, which, we've worked with customers for, decades now.
Yep.
And it's the same stuff. So now it's just personal in my backyard. And the cool part is I'm the customer.
Yep.
So
Yep.
whenever I see it and I know it needs to be done, or I dream it up, I get to implement it
Nice.
when I have the time.
Now, going back 25 years, I mean, I've learned a lot from you personally, even back when I was young. At Dell, I was a summer intern on your team at Dell, and then joined it, and then when I became an independent contractor, you were my boss at Callaway Golf, reporting to you on that project, and then and kind of got to see you do all kinds of cool things. So the long history, and just so the listeners know, you were on the project that birthed the AutoMapper and the Mediator libraries that Jimmy Bogard has, kind of enhanced and maintained all these years. That was, a pretty cool project. We've had Jimmy on the show talking about, the genesis of those two things as well. So, you've done a lot of pretty intense software projects. And so you're bringing all that experience now to kind of running this, turf management business and installing ball fields and maintaining them and other things. So with that type of background, here's an open-ended question. You've seen, like you mentioned, Y2K and those old crusty COBOL systems to, the internet era, and then the agile transformation, then the DevOps, and then the cloud. So what do you think about this new AI transition, this AI world?
It's now I haven't been living on the forefront of it, but I've been reading about it quite a bit, seeing a lot of people talk about it, experienced people, like yourself and the people you have in your podcast, and then peers that we used to work with, and people we know in the industry. It's going so fast, and I still come back to. So I just dove into it a little bit recently, with one of a new feature that I brought into the company to help our field staff all over the state, and what I noticed real quick was, yes, it feels like it's a very sharp, a lot of really fantastic sharp tools, but, in the wrong hands or someone who doesn't have, much experience developing software at all, or maybe to the standards that, um, you know, a lot of us are in the business for a long time and we focused on, certain quality practices, test first, test driven design, solid principles, things like that. You know, it's a real easy way to fabricate some fantastically crummy software for your organization. And so, you know, I'm fortunate enough to where I came from, I had some experience before, but there's so many people now that are just, in a business and, maybe they're specifically technology people, or maybe they're, business people who, know how to do some stuff. They're taking these tools, so many different tools and just, vibe coding or just vibing out, some functionality. And, it's fine for things that maybe aren't so critical, business critical, but man, you put something when, that's, hopefully if you're doing something for the business, it's useful, and it's, maybe profitable or, helping your top line revenue or, your cost situations. You can really, bring a business, organization or, an area to a halt if you're putting some software out there that was created by, some LLM that you're, having fun with.
Mm-hmm.
And you can really bring stuff to a halt and some, and hurt, things. So as usual, some, analysis and basically just the, the ability to, or the know-how, I guess, of if you know what good software looks like and you have, your principles, of a software, team, whether it's team 1, 2, 3, or 30, if you have those solid principles down, you know how to steer these fantastic new tools and capabilities into something that truly is, beneficial across the board, and, one of those obviously is, wow, how much faster can we generate, the good stuff that we already know how to develop, all the practices and procedures that we know develops good quality software to run our business.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can get better. We can, be smarter with that. We can put some easy stuff on, some accelerated paths over here, doesn't need as much hand holding. While we continue to, kind of focus our energies on, still being, a quality software team, maybe we can just be a lot faster now. So it's really easy, I think, with these, with these new capabilities to churn out some negative stuff. And then once you do that, also, we've all done it, when you have some software that, got put into production and, yeah, okay, we'll need to fix that probably a little bit, or we're going to need to tighten that up a little bit. Some organizations, you may not have that luxury. You're just going to be band-aiding a lot of stuff for a while. So, the sharper you are when implementing, software in any way, shape, or form, the stronger the organization is going to be. And you don't want to be you don't want your technology department to be, those guys, they deployed another thing. What'd they break now? You don't want to be that, right? So,
Yeah.
So I think, the capabilities are great, and, it's wild, actually. It's what, technology, us humans and technology now are coming up with, and the capabilities are growing month to month. Just look where we were a year ago with all the different things in front of us.
Yeah.
Wow. It's wild. And so, it's exciting, but, solid processes and technology, good software processes and, knowing how to put out technology that is a benefit and not a detriment to an organization.
Mm-hmm.
Those things don't go away. Maybe we can just get better and faster.
Well, you mentioned when either users or somebody in the business, they can't do their job, something broke. And then, they come back to the technologists and they're like, seriously, where's the professionalism? This thing is broke again. And they don't see, and they don't even care about things that in the industry there've been very robust debates on early on. I mean, 25 years ago, the industry was arguing over naming conventions and should you put an underscore in front of your camel casing versus Pascal casing and tabs and spaces and like all these little minute things and how the code should look when you read it that are totally invisible when it's running in production. And the people in production, they just want to know, is it working right? Can I use it? Does it throw errors at me? And then all the internal patterns, those are hidden, and they don't care as long as it's working. And so it seems like with AI tools drafting and modifying as many, more and more lines of code, it seems like as an industry, we are forced to give up internal arguments of, oh, I liked this pattern or I liked to do it this way. Why? Because I was personally looking at the code and asking ourselves the question, does that have any bearing on any of its external or runtime characteristics? Does it enhance or degrade from its actual stability, its speed, its robustness, those kinds of things? I just made me think of that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we used to, spend a lot of time, the code reviews that we used to sometimes, be involved in. I know back in Dell was, oftentimes it turned into, just the minutia of that, just keeping our naming conventions, and, in line. And, oftentimes, if it was a big enough release, we didn't ever really get to, are we accomplishing what this feature is supposed to be? Mm-hmm. And sometimes you didn't really know it because we didn't really have a lot of automated tests back then either. It was just, does it look like we think it should? And, the UAT testers will tell us if we broke something, I guess. We had we had that, and hopefully they had some decent scripts, to run off of. So hopefully now we can start. Our tooling now helps us keep all that stuff in line, and we can bake that in so we can focus on still turning out quality software. Where we've got tests in the small, tests in the medium, and tests in the large, and that we have the solid principles, and trying to drive stuff test first. I still try and do that, because that's the way it helps me think through this little feature that I'm trying to do. Mm-hmm. And that I still do it. I mean, started that in what year was that? When did we start doing test first stuff? What year was that?
05, 06. I mean, it was when, like that, it's right? When continuous integration really started catching hold.
Yeah. So, I mean, those first principles, they're still there because I found them beneficial, to me. And now here I'm a software developer of one here in my company. Yeah. And, I'm still sticking to it. I'm not falling off, and saying, oh, well, I know where that is, or I know that. I'm going to sleep a few times probably before the next time I open this code back up or do something different or make a change or whatever. Mm-hmm. In addition, I'm naming stuff and putting notes on, on my code and naming tests, as if, I'm going to forget this tomorrow,
Right.
So, and so I'm still coding as if someone else might, come next to me and pick up after me and say, all right, what did you need me to finish here? What features do you need me to do here? And that I've got something that's not resembling spaghetti,
right.
And that there's a fighting chance of stepping in. And, that's just, you do that enough for a number of years and working with a lot of really, really incredibly, bright people in the forefront of the software industry, which is everybody we worked with, back in the day. And, I don't want to lose any of that because I know how valuable that is. I need to be able to know by implementing these quality software, practices that my code is not going to break, my company out here. I've got 20 field users every day and they're completing work orders in the field. I want to make sure that when they take a picture of that image of a work order that they completed, that my process is going to pick that up and process it, well, and that I don't have to step in if something goes sideways, that I don't have to step in at, 6:00, or 8 p.m. if I get an email that something errored, or I don't, something just kind of goes amiss in the operation. And, we discover something after, 3 days. Oh, hey, I haven't gotten anything on this, in this queue in days.
Right.
So I still put those quality processes in there because I want to make sure that every change I make, I'm not breaking something, and that, I'm not making something worse or, creating that spaghetti. I just, developer of one, and I still work that way because that's the only way I know.
Well, being a developer of one, you are forced into finishing pieces of software, because if every piece of software required you to actually monitor it and like, oh yeah, let me bang on the side of it here, let me poke it here, let me keep it doing its job. There's not enough hours in the day for you to do that with all the different processes that you have running around. Whereas I think there's an anti-pattern that has crept into the IT industry over time, internal IT, where you don't have just project teams. You got consistent teams where the team name is the name of the major computer system. And you have an ongoing software, not just production operations, but you got software engineering team that's constantly dedicated to that. And what we pretend in those teams is, what we pretend is that those systems need ongoing continuous development. But if you really look at it, the most of the capacity of the team goes to babysit the system in production and handling the steady stream of production issues and things breaking, and forget about future enhancements. The existing feature set somehow never actually truly got finished. In other words, if that team were to go on a 1-month vacation, the system would fall down and the business just literally wouldn't be able to do those things. And whereas in your situation, you are forced to finish every deployed process that you have to make sure that, it continues to do what it's supposed to do, even when I'm not looking.
Yeah, it needs to be bulletproof. Because, I kind of make my own schedule here, but I run this office, and, a bunch of other things I'm responsible for. So, it needs to be bulletproof. I mean, I've got a couple processes that have been running for years that I have not redeployed code. I got it to a point where, I had it all covered, but I haven't needed any other feature improvements, to it. And it just runs. And it's like every now and then I just need to redeploy it just to kind of, familiarize myself with, with all my, with the pieces again. If nothing else, just to, make sure, I still got the, pass keys and stuff like that to log in. I mean, but I got there and it got to that point because I had to fight the different things that, whenever I was implementing it, an error, an edge case comes up where I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I know what that means. So I had to go to my CRM, put a little data check or something like that, so that a process a week later will run smoothly without error and handle a different type of data or something like that.
Yeah.
Same way with my day-to-day, work order thing that's out in the field. The guys complete that, it just runs. Everything is idempotent, which once you start going to, messages flying around where time is, something can sit in a queue for a while, or, somebody's cell phone, is not, is the tower's not, it's going to store it and forward later, things like that. Those messages, they need to be idempotent, and it's not too complex, but you sure do like it, whenever you develop and you architect something like that, so that if like I have this happen, I'm kind of on the basic consumption plan, on a Azure function, right now. It does a cold start every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
Who cares? Right. So it'll process the same message, sometimes 3 times, like it'll just see three requests, and I get that echoed out, in our Slack channel that I integrated. And, it looks a little weird, but I just tell everybody, hey, it's fine. It's no big deal. That's just software being software.
Yeah.
But it's actually trying to process the same message 3 times, but it's not important. I don't care. You can do it 1,000 times.
Yeah.
It's just using some more compute. Who cares? So all these different things need to be bulletproof. If it errored every time for some reason, I'll be busy. Just that'd be my full-time job, is trying to fix that, we've all had systems where, we've worked in places where, you had a little thing where, oh, Dave needs to, hey, go kick that process, do whatever you do to make that queue clear out, Oh yeah. Yeah. So whenever he's not there, that doesn't happen. So, right. Being a team of one here, I've taken all that fun experience from years past and the quality processes that, you and I used to labor over to, write rock solid software for a business organization. And, I'm doing that for me so that, I know that stuff is running. I don't have to babysit it. If something happens, it's probably something pretty new and interesting. And I'll spin the cycles to investigate and analyze it further and put something else in.
So you mentioned using the AI tools to kind of help you work on the code and work on those processes. And we see a lot of the more AI companies, even the big ones and even startup companies, pitching that all of the business users should be using AI and should be putting AI agents in place to do various things. And that is a very different message from the past, where, new technology comes around and the new technology kind of just gets baked into computer automation, and then, regular users do their thing, and it's just, okay, more tasks are now automated so they can focus on the things that require their judgment. So you have lots of people doing lots of different roles, and then you have the software kind of automating the things that you can. What is your view on your overall AI deployment at the company?
Really, the only AI that we've implemented purposefully, and that's just me doing a bit of computer vision, actually, and that's running in the background. AI, the only pieces that we're really touching AI wise is usually like the tools that the commercial tools that we're deploying. We use Google Workspace, in our company. So it's got different pieces at the edges, to help you with your email, that all that typical kind of interesting stuff that sometimes you'd want to turn off. So some things like that at the edges. So those tools, but really, we run pretty lean here. I have a primary office manager that triages every order that comes in, kicks out our work orders to different offices. It's all electronic. That's all done through our CRM that I customized. It's web-based that I customize. It syncs with like our QuickBooks file on the back end. We're still doing that. And then, really, I don't have a ton of people. My sales guys, they use, Google Workspace and our CRM to handle our, what we call turf programs, all the fields that we help customers manage around the state, all orders and invoices we do internally through our CRM, and they integrate with QuickBooks. Some of the other AI we're using is really just like our expense management. It's all commercial. It's just those different commercial tools, really, that they implement different AI to, pull up information out of a receipt, which is our expense. I got 25 credit cards, being used every day in this company. And so we're paying for a tool, that they have to submit all their receipts. Some of those are automated, when they come in via email, but a lot of them are, employees in the field putting in there. So there's a lot of AI, kind of at the edges with those third-party commercial tools that we're picking up and using, a monthly or yearly subs. But then custom stuff internally, all I've done really is just put together a Azure computer vision tool that sparked out of a conversation you and I had actually when last time you were in Kerrville and we had lunch together, and we were talking about my business and stuff, and we thought about some automation on a piece of that, and so I finally spent a lot more cycles earlier this year and put that in. So it's a Slack integration where I'm using Azure's computer vision to where it pulls out of a mass of pieces of paper or just one piece of paper, doesn't matter, looking for a particular token. It just pulls all the text out of an image and then tokenizes it. And then I know my particular string that I'm looking for and pulling that out of there. And then I do something that I bounce it off my CRM API.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes Slack to, Azure function to, Azure's, computer vision API basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then I use, and it's all on the fly, an image on the fly. It's taking, it's converting bytes out of an image, changing it from the iPhone HEIC. It's got to go to like a JPEG or something like that. All that's on the fly in memory. I'm not landing on a disk anywhere. So all those are, different pieces that I put together, and all that was just from one little, hey, wouldn't it be nice
Mm-hmm.
to not incorrectly enter a work order number anymore. That's what it was born out of.
Right.
So that's my first main really, use of AI, and it's being used about 25, 30 times a day, now all over the state of Texas. We're using, we're staying lean. I mean, we're not even paying for Slack. 90-day message history is all I need on Slack. So, we're staying on the free tier of that.
Nice.
So, so bits of AI at the edges, some commercial tools, and then that one custom process that I've got running now, that's using computer vision. That's been, that's been what now I am using, some GitHub AI, and Visual Studio. I still pop out to GPT just to get help with a refactor every now and then. I mean, I'm pretty simple still on it. I still work off of stickies and note cards we used to, do test driven with together.
Mm-hmm.
Got my features down. Now I kind of keep them in a stack in Visual Studio, and, letting GitHub, help me out with some of the, jamming out some of the code, and it's pretty smart. I still fight it a little bit. I still like my refactor, my resharper,
Yep.
my resharper thing is still going strong.
Yeah. The JetBrains
hand in
tools.
hand with some of the GitHub. Yeah. It's been, that's, I don't know how to work without it. Even if I took, say, 6 months off and didn't have to do any software, which I did for a while, I jumped back in and, habits, I'm still doing the Idea J, keyboard layout.
Yep.
And like my brain it's like, good luck training on something else, it's because I've tried a little bit, I'm like, I stand up a new laptop workstation or something. And
Yeah.
Before I change over to that, I'm like, well, let's see what, Visual Studio is got me here. I'm like, it's too big of a shift, man.
Right,
So,
right.
ReSharper. Yeah.
Yeah. All the
I'm a
JetBrains
lifer.
tools and IDEs, they have been really consistent on the keyboard shortcuts. So you can move across all of them with that muscle memory.
Yeah. So once you got a developer that's steeped in it, it's like, you got them because it's works great. And my brain is just it's like brushing your teeth with your other hand. It's like, wow, okay.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
doesn't. This is different. Or I could just do the same thing with how efficient I am with the other. So
Yeah. So as we close up here, the kind of the last observation or question, it seems like everything you've described is putting together a enterprise-wide software automation system that literally I can't see any AI tool being able to do. You hear about vibe coding this and vibe coding that. There is no way that you could go to an AI tool and just start, just describe the business process and, all right, they're going to snap a picture with the phone here and they're going to do this and then they're going to hand the paper to this guy and then they're going to drive to Midland, Texas, and then they're going to, and so just, hey, AI coding tool, put that in place. There is so much integration between different technologies to orchestrate that flow that it's totally outside the bounds of what you could prompt a tool to do. It's almost like you can prompt within a certain architectural box, but you're doing true, even for your one company, you're doing true enterprise architecture work, in your brain, in your actual intelligence, not artificial intelligence. And then just like filling in little boxes with the AI tool.
Yeah. That's it. It's it is fun. I mean, again, I didn't invent anything when I started here in 2010. I just took and saw what we did, and then started putting technology, in front of it or replacing it with, excuse me, and it's all over the state. Yeah. So it's and it's little pieces here, at the edges.
Yep.
That help us, keep lean also. I mean, we could easily scale more people, and maybe at some point my order management system, I have one person handle all of our incoming orders from our 7 sales guys around the state of Texas. When we had a paper process, I probably would have had to have, incorporate 2, maybe 3 more people to execute that. And they'd probably have to be in other locations in the state.
Yeah.
We still do that with one person, largely, one, right here in this office, every day. And so only some, technology that works for you, that you haven't broken, that you're putting out features to, that's keeping up with you, have, allowed us to stay lean and not have to hire so many more people. So now we can, reduce to a series of clicks what previously, if we didn't, we'd have an office full of people. And so I've been able to stave that off, because, that's the hardest thing to do is scale people.
Yeah.
It's a good problem to have, if you're needing that. But especially in the technology world, with CRMs and our order management systems and things like that, if we don't have to have a ton of people running that, the better. So that's what I've been able to do here. For sure.
Well, Blake, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your journey with me. That's fascinating. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Life in the real world out here, man. We've got small businesses and, they come in all shapes and sizes, and we work with a lot of them, vendors or others, other similar businesses, like ours, a lot of family businesses too, that we work with, and they have a lot of the similar challenges and qualities and characteristics. So, they're not all Dells and
right.
That's the backbone is actually closer to the, these smaller, small, medium-sized businesses. And it's a lot of fun, actually. So, it's a lot of fun. You're closer to the work in action.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. And until next time, dear listener, you keep shipping.
You've been listening to the AI Devops podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and everywhere else. Visit our sponsor, ClearMeasure, at clearmeasure.com. And on behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, Thanks for listening, and may God bless you.